Johann Hari, thank you for being here.
I'm well chuffed to be here, Sean. Thanks so much.
There's something going on out there, isn't there? I look at my Instagram feed and celebrities look fantastic. I open Twitter and all of the tech billionaires are chiseled. And the only conclusion I can arrive at is that everybody has hired the fanciest private chefs. They've downloaded Couch to 5K and they're using nothing but willpower to get out there and fix their bodies. Or is there something else going on?
Yeah, I think most people know by now there's been a staggering medical breakthrough. So, scientists have discovered a new kind of weight loss drug that works in a completely new mechanism. They've basically, as one of them put it to me, they've cracked the code of what controls appetite. I've invented a new series of drugs. So, Ozempic, Wegovy, it's the same drug with different names. If you take that, you will lose on average 15% of your body weight in a year. With Mounjaro, which is the next in this class of drugs, you'll lose on average 21% of your body weight. And when I learned about these drugs, I felt really conflicted because the first thing I thought was, well, shit, this could save my life because I was obese. I've been obese most of my adult life, and I was about to become older than my grandfather had ever got to be because he died of a heart attack when he was 44. Loads of the men in my family get heart disease. I knew that obesity makes heart disease and 200 known other diseases and complications either more likely or worse when you get them. So I thought, wow, if there's a drug that can really reverse obesity or massively reduce it, that could be a game changer. But I also immediately thought, wait a minute, this sounds way too good to be true. In the past, we've had diet drugs. They've always turned out to be a horror show in the end. Can you really have such a thing as a free lunch when it comes to, your body and food? I guess with Ozempic, it would be a smaller free lunch. So I went for a big journey all over the world, went on a big journey all over the world to try to figure out the truth about these drugs from Iceland to Minneapolis to Okinawa in the south of Japan. I interviewed the leading experts on the drugs, the people who designed them, people who made the breakthroughs, their biggest critics. And what I learned is there's a complex truth here, which is these drugs are unbelievably powerful. And the subtitle of my book, Magic Pill, is The Extraordinary Benefits and Disturbing Risks of the New Weight Loss Drugs. And both halves of that are true. For some people, these drugs are going to save their lives. For some people, I fear these drugs are going to kill them. And we need to think about this in all of its complexity, because this is going to change the lives of everyone listening in one way or another. 47% of Americans want to take these drugs. Soon they're going to be pretty cheap. They're going to be very available. We need to take a beat to think through who should be taking these drugs and who shouldn't be taking these drugs. And what is it going to mean for all of us that now we can actually control our weight in a way that we have not been able to do up to now?
So something you touched on there is the idea that this class of drugs is somehow different, right?
Yeah.
Even I am old enough to realize that we've been through these phases where you're told that if a weight loss drug is on the market, it's either nonsense or it's some sort of like laxative coffee sold by an MLM that's just going to make you shit lots. But this is neither of those, right? What's actually going on inside of our bodies when somebody takes a drug like Ozempic?
Yeah, it's funny. The ones that make you shit yourself. There was one in the must be about 20 years ago called Orlistat, which got nicknamed Oily Shat because that's what it made you do. This is totally different. So if you ate something now, Sean, doesn't matter what it is, after a little while, your pancreas will produce a hormone called GLP-1. And GLP-1 is basically part of your body's natural system. Going, hey, Sean, you've had enough. Stop eating. And natural GLP-1 stays around in your system for a couple of minutes and then it's washed away. What these drugs do is they inject you with an artificial copy of GLP-1 that instead of sticking around for a few minutes, stays around in your system for a whole week. So it has this weird effect. It's like the brakes are on all the time, right? On your eating. So I'll never forget, second day after I was so to research this, I took Ozempic. And the second day after I started taking it, I was lying in bed and I woke up and I thought, oh, I feel something weird. What is it? And I couldn't quite locate in my body what it was. And it took me about 5 minutes to realize I had woken up and I wasn't hungry. I thought, oh, that's weird. I used to wake up with a kind of raging hunger. Often it'd be what got me out of bed. And I went to this cafe just up the road from where I live that I used to go to every morning. And I ordered, slightly embarrassed to say, what I used to get every day, which is a huge chicken bat with loads of chicken and mayo in it. And I had like 3 mouthfuls and I was just full. Normally I would eat the whole thing and then want some crisps as well. And that was how it was from then on. You just feel very full very fast, and it's like shutters come down on your appetite. So I went from eating 3,200 calories a day to about 1,800 calories a day. It was a really remarkable transformation. It it felt so different. I realized until I took these drugs, I don't think I had ever really felt full. There's plenty of times I'd felt stuffed, like so stuffed I couldn't have any more, but not full, right? So it's a really profound effect, and this is the way one of the scientists put it to me: is we've cracked the code of what regulates appetite. It's gut hormones, right? So Ozempic and Wegovy work on one gut hormone, the one I just mentioned, GLP-1. Mounjaro, which is the next in this class drug, actually works on two gut hormones. It simulates two gut hormones, which is why you get an even bigger weight loss. Next year, probably, we've got a drug, it's already available, that's been trialed, but it'll be available next year, called Triple G, that works on three gut hormones. The average person who takes that loses 24% of their body weight in a year, which is only a little bit below if you have bariatric surgery. So this is, the word that kept coming up with the scientists I spoke with is game changer. This is really different, totally new mechanism. It really does work. Now, there's a big question about, does it cause negative effects that outweigh those positive effects? But there is no, which is a very much an open debate. But there is no disputing these drugs work in producing massive amounts of sustained weight loss.
And then let's look at some of the secondary degree effects of weight loss. Because
Yeah.
I'll be honest, living in my my kind of naive little world, I assumed that weight loss was just like an aesthetic thing, right? But fortunately, I've never really had to consider it. I read your book, I listen to the research, I realize that actually being overweight or being obese is linked to an endless list of diseases, some of which I didn't even know had anything to do with this kind of physical manifestation. What happens to somebody when they lose 20% of their body weight if they're already in a place of being overweight or obese? What are those upsides?
I'm glad you said that, Sean, because I'm a bit embarrassed to say, obviously I learned a huge amount in the research for the book. But the thing that most shocked me in what I learned is actually the thing that I think I thought I'd known all my life, or since I was a little boy. Pretty sure since I was like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, if you'd said to me, Johann, is being overweight bad for you? I would have gone, yeah, right? I guess I knew that. I obviously did. I was stunned by how bad for you obesity is. Now, we should all oppose stigma. It's a form of bullying and cruelty. We should all also tell the scientific truth about what obesity does to people and what, in fact, it did to me. So basically, almost all the illnesses we fear are made much more likely by being obese, not just being obese, by being overweight. From dementia to stroke to heart attack to diabetes. And even if you think about diabetes, so obesity, if you're obese when you're 18, you've got a 70% chance of developing type 2 diabetes in your lifetime, right? And I'm pretty sure I thought before I did this research, well, obviously it's not a good thing to be diabetic, but if you live in a country like ours where we've got the NHS, as long as you get insulin, you're basically fine, right? I thought a diabetic plus insulin is like you and me. That's not true at all. From looking at the research and interviewing doctors who treat diabetics, if you get type 2 diabetes, it knocks 15 years off your life on average. It's the biggest preventable cause of blindness in Britain. More Americans have to have a limb or extremity cut off because of diabetes than because they got shot. And you will have noticed a fucking lot of Americans get shot, right? In fact, a doctor called Max Pemberton, who treats diabetics and is an old friend of mine, said to me something that sounds incredibly shocking when you first hear it. When you look at the evidence, you can see where he's coming from. He said, if you gave me a choice between becoming HIV positive or becoming diabetic, type 2 diabetes, I would choose to become HIV positive, because if you get HIV and you get medical treatment, you live as long as everyone else. That is not true of people with type 2 diabetes. And that's just one of 200 known negative effects of being overweight or obese. A cancer, it's one of the biggest causes of cancer in Britain. I didn't know that. Because when you carry excess fat in your body, it doesn't just sit there. It's not inert. It's active. It sends signals through your body, and one of the signals it sends is for your cells to divide more rapidly, which can cause cancer, right? So what we know is when you reduce or reverse obesity, on average, you massively boost people's health. So we know this, for example, from bariatric surgery. People have only been taking these new drugs for a couple of years, so for obesity. So think about bariatric surgery, things like gastric bands. It's where very overweight people have an operation. What does that do for people's health? In the 7 years after that operation, you are 58% less likely to die of a heart attack. You are 60% less likely to die of cancer. You are 92% less likely to die of diabetes-related causes. In fact, it's so good for your health, you're 40% less likely to die at all in those 7 years. So we know that reducing or reversing obesity massively boosts health. We know that's true with these drugs. If you take these drugs and you had a BMI higher than 27 at the start, you're 20% less likely to have a heart attack or stroke in the next 2 years. Incredible, right? That could literally be saving my life. But what we have to do when we're thinking about these drugs, everyone is thinking about taking them, is weigh two sets of risks. There's the risks of being obese, which are very significant. And then there's the risks of these drugs. And I go through the common side effects, but also the 12 big risks associated with these drugs. For many people, the risks will outweigh the benefits. And it may be in the long term they outweigh the benefits for almost everyone. Although I don't think that's likely, it is possible. So we've got anyone who just says the reaction to these drugs should be boo, they're evil, or yay, they're the best thing in the world, I think is missing the much more complicated and interesting point in the middle, which is that we have to think about this in a complex and nuanced way.
Something that struck me as you were speaking there, 200 diseases and ailments linked to obesity, is that this feels like an unfair battle. Now, this feels tangential, but I promise I'll bring it back, right? So I've been thinking about this idea recently that nobody decides to be unhappy. Nobody has ever woken up and decided to hate their life or stay in a relationship within which they feel trapped or work that job they hate. It happens passively over many years and you don't realize it. And then I look at the ultra-processed food industry and food manufacturing, and I'm trying to kind of dive more into that right now. And it feels like the exact same thing, that we don't know what we're up against, right? It feels like we're battling billion-dollar businesses every time we decide what to get in our meal deal. So how on earth did we get here?
It's a really smart question. And I think an analogy with depression is bang on the money. I wrote a book about this called Lost Connections, about why so many of us are becoming depressed and anxious. And there are definitely some biological elements of that, but actually the reason, I'm 45, every year that I've been alive, depression and anxiety have increased in Britain. And the reason is overwhelmingly because of factors in the way we're living, right? And in that book, I go through those. We should have a conversation about that another time. And in precisely the same way, or in a very similar way, obesity has risen because of environmental factors. So I would just urge everyone listening or watching, pause this podcast for a second and Google something for me. Google photographs of beaches in Britain in the 1970s and just look at them for a minute, right? So I was born in 1979. Okay, I hope you've done that and come back. You will have noticed something really weird if you look at those photos. Pretty much everyone in them looks like what we would call skinny or jacked, right? And you look at it and go, that's weird. Where was everyone else on the beach that day, right? Was it like a skinny person convention on Brighton Beach? And then you look at the figures. In the year I was born, 1979, 6% of British people were obese. It's now 27%. It's really important to understand how weird this is in the arc of human history. You have 300,000 years where human beings exist, and obesity sometimes happened, but was very rare. And then it blows the fuck up in my lifetime, right? I'm not saying it's my fault. I'm not like the Antichrist or something. But so what happened, right? And we know what happened. Obesity blows up everywhere that makes one change. It's where people move from mostly eating fresh whole foods that they prepared on the day to mostly eating processed or ultra-processed foods, which are constructed out of chemicals in factories in a process that isn't even called cooking, it's called manufacturing food. And this new kind of food that never existed before, your grandparents, great-grandparents never ate it, until it was invented in my lifetime. It affects our bodies in completely different ways. And I go through loads of reasons for this in the book and how it does it. But I'll tell you about an experiment that to me just nails it. It was done by a brilliant scientist called Dr. Paul Kenny, who's the head of neuroscience at Mount Sinai in New York City. And obviously I interviewed him. And he did an experiment that I've nicknamed Cheesecake Park, not the official name. It's very simple. You get a load of rats and you raise them in a cage. And all they've got to eat is the kind of natural whole foods that the rats evolved to eat over thousands of years. The kind of thing your great-grandparents ate, right? The rat equivalent of it. And when that's all they've got, the rats would eat when they were hungry and stop when they were full. They seem to have some natural ability to know, I've had enough now, stop. They never became fat. Then Dr. Kenny introduced them to the kind of American diet that we now all eat, right? He fried up some bacon, he bought a load of Snickers bars, he bought a load of cheesecake, and he put it in the cage alongside the healthy food. And the rats went ape shit for the American diet. I don't know if rats can go ape shit, but you know what I mean? The rats went crazy for the American diet. They would literally dive into the cheesecake and eat their way out and emerge just totally slicked with cheesecake. They shunned the healthy food and they ate and ate and ate and ate. The way Dr. Kenny put it to me was within a couple of days, they were different animals. That natural wisdom that told them when to stop eating vanished. And they all became severely obese. Then Dr. Kenny tweaked the experiment again in a way that to me as a former KFC addict feels a bit cruel. He took away the American diet and left them with nothing but the healthy food they'd evolved for. And he was pretty sure he knew what would happen. They would eat more of the healthy food than they had at the start. And this would prove that this kind of diet, increases the number of calories you eat in a day. That is not what happened. Something much weirder happened. Once they'd had the American diet and it was taken away, they refused to eat the healthy food. It was like they no longer recognized it as food. It was only when they were literally starving and wasting away that they finally grudgingly went back to it. Now, I would argue we are all living in a version of Cheesecake Park right now. The food we are eating is undermining our ability to ever feel full and know when to stop. And that's where these drugs come in. These drugs give you back your sense of fullness, but at a cost, right? This is why Professor Michael Lowe, one of the leading experts on hunger in the world at Drexel University in Philly, said to me, these drugs are an artificial solution to an artificial problem. Processed and ultra-processed food digs this hole of hunger inside us, and then these drugs fill that hole. Or a different way of thinking of it is we're in a trap, and these drugs are a trapdoor. It's a risky, rusty trapdoor, but for many of us, it's the only trapdoor we're being offered.
I draw another analogy to another of your books, actually, when you were speaking there, which is the fallacy that we can somehow shame addicts into stopping being addicts, right? And it seems that we treat overweight people much in the same way. Again, from my point of naivety and ignorance, frankly, in the past, I would look at somebody overeating and I'd assume that's a lifestyle choice, right? But the more I learn, particularly from your book, the more I realize that we're mistaken, are we not, if we treat overweight people in the same way the society treats drug addicts and assume that it is entirely their own decision and that they're the bad people?
It's a really wise question. I think we all, how would I put it? If shaming fat people worked, there would be no fat people. 42% of women with a BMI higher than 35 get insulted every single day. And I do think there are lots of people who genuinely, I think some of that is just cruelty and sadism. Some of it is fear. We fear becoming fat ourselves, so we want to kind of ward it off by being meaner to people who are fatter than us. I also think some of it is sincere. Some people genuinely believe that you're doing it for their own good, right? Oh, I'm doing this to them so they'll lose weight and become healthier, right? And there's been lots of scientific research on this. Shaming people and stigmatizing fat people actually makes people fatter over time, partly because if you're made to feel ashamed and traumatized, you actually comfort eat more. Partly, I think it's something that a really interesting writer called Lindy West said. Making overweight people hate their bodies doesn't make them treat their bodies better, right? You don't take good care of a thing you hate, is how she put it to me. So it is true, this is me speaking now, not what she says. We absolutely do need to warn about the dangers of obesity. It's, by many measures, the biggest killer of people in Britain and the United States and most of the developed world now. We absolutely need to warn about that. Um, Warning about it in a bullying way, shaming and stigmatizing people, in addition to being cruel, and we shouldn't do things that are cruel, although we all have cruel impulses in us, and we should be honest about that. That's not a it's not a good solution to a problem. In addition to it being cruel, it actually doesn't work, right? It actually makes the problem worse. So we need to look at the deeper solutions, which for some people will be these drugs, but mostly I think will be in the longer term fixing the environment, right? Which sounds very fancy, but if we could even go back to the environment of 1979 in many ways, we would have dramatically less obesity than we have now. I went to countries that have done that, like Japan. I've seen how it can be done. So it's not some kind of pie in the sky thing. It absolutely can be done. We particularly can do it for our kids. For someone like me who's grown up in this trap, it's very hard to go back without some kind of external assistance. But for our kids, we don't have to tolerate them growing up in this trap, and our grandchildren and people being trapped forever in this choice between a risky medical condition and potentially risky drugs.
So we've looked at some of the obvious health benefits and how we got here, but speaking about that younger generation, I think there's another interesting question that you may have the answers to here, which is on the flip side of the coin, what happens if and when these drugs become too accessible? Now, I was a bit of a guinea pig over the weekend. I Googled Ozempic, I clicked on the top sponsored result, and I filled in what felt like a very serious medical questionnaire. That's the best way I can describe it, right? The company selling this drug had gone to great lengths to make this feel very official, right? So I'm typing in all of this stuff about my medical history and my background and so on. And then it asked me two crucial pieces of information: my height and my weight, from which it derives my BMI. My BMI is 21. That is on the lower end of the healthy scale. I think if I lost 20% of my body weight, I would be dead. And yeah, it pops up with this big official page saying, well done, you're a perfect candidate for this drug. Let's get started now. Click here to make a payment. If a big, important feeling questionnaire, for want of a better phrase, is validating that feeling that I may or may not have had, right? Fortunately, I do not think that. I look in the mirror and think I'm a bit skinny fat every now and then, but I'm not going to start using these drugs. But if I were somebody who was pre-exposed to that idea, and then a company's telling me you're a perfect candidate based on the information you've given us, where on earth does that leave us?
Yeah, in my book Magic Pill, I go through 12 big risks about these drugs. This is the one that most worries me for the wider society. You're totally right. So there's sort of two separate things there. There's skinny people who are becoming super skinny for aesthetic reasons, and then there's people with eating disorders. So let's come back to the skinny people who want to be super skinny. I mean, obviously there's an overlap between those two things, obviously, but the eating disorders element is the thing that most terrifies me. So I'm guessing pretty much everyone listening will have known someone with an eating disorder in their life. And what we know is people with eating disorders have a conflict within them. There's the part of them that the biological part of them that wants to live and therefore wants to eat, right? And that makes them eat something. And then there's the psychological part of them that for complicated reasons makes them think that they're fat and makes them starve themselves, right? And that conflict is constantly going on inside them. When people with eating disorders take these drugs, what it does is it massively empowers the psychological part of them that wants to starve themselves against the biological part of them that wants to eat. If someone like me that had such a strong impulse to eat, if I, go down from 3,200 calories a day to 1,800, imagine what happens if you're starting at 1,800, right? What these drugs can do is just amputate your appetite. And we don't have to speculate about this, it's happening. Dr. Kimberly Dennis, one of the leading eating disorders experts in the US, told me, these drugs are rocket fuel for eating disorders. So I'm extremely worried. The way I think about these drugs is this is slightly over the top, but only a little bit. These drugs are a really powerful tool, like fire, right? Fire is an amazing tool. If I use fire to warm my house up, that's a great thing. If I use it to burn your house down, it's a bad thing, right? In the same way, these drugs are so powerful. They are an amazing tool for someone like me that has been obese most of my adult life and has a risk of heart disease in my family. They are horrific and catastrophic for people with eating disorders. And I think that little experiment you did is so chilling because, and there's a solution to this, which Dr. Dennis and people have been arguing for. So at the moment, I mean, you are I can see you should not be given these drugs, unless you had type 2 diabetes, of course. You should not be given these drugs, right? You would be given all of the risks and none of the benefits. What Dr. Dennis has argued, and other eating disorders experts, is these drugs should only be, at the moment you can get them on Zoom or through online questionnaires. that is just, I mean, you may as well just be handing them out in the street at that point, right? I mean, you are charging money for them, but you know that you're giving them to anyone. These drugs, we need to really urgently tighten these regulations so that you can only get these drugs through an inpatient appointment with a doctor in person who sees you, obviously weighs you, makes sure you are in fact overweight, and is trained in spotting eating disorders. And if you're not overweight, they don't give you the drug. And if you have eating disorders, then they refer you for help for eating disorders. We really urgently need to do that. If we don't do that, my suspicion is that we will have an opioid-like death toll of young girls. I mean, obviously, you do get some young boys with eating disorders, and you get some older people, but it's overwhelmingly young girls. Um, that you will get an opioid-like death toll from that. Separate to that, or slightly overlapping with that, is skinny people taking it to be super skinny. Now, I don't judge any that. Again, that's mostly women. Generally, men in our culture, we want to bulk up rather than slim down. Of course, there are some boys who want to slim down, but mostly, and so that's men. We've got other issues with steroids and things. Not belittling that. There's real issues around that, but it's different, right? Women are made to feel like shit about their bodies no matter what they do, right? There's no body type a woman can get where she doesn't get shit. So I'm not criticizing or judging any woman who makes that choice, but I would really urge them in a spirit of love and compassion to, if you're not overweight, to not take these drugs, because you're actually building up quite a lot of health risks. You're taking on the big 12 big health risks that I write about in Magic Pill, but also you are potentially incurring another risk. So when you lose weight through any method, whether it's these drugs or just diet and exercise, you don't just lose fat mass, you generally lose muscle mass, right? Muscle mass is the total amount of soft tissue in your body that you need to like move around, get out of a chair, you know, walk up the stairs. And generally you lose muscle mass by about 8% every decade from when you're 30 onwards, which is incredibly depressing for someone my age, but there you are. So you just naturally shed it. If you are going into the aging process with very low amounts of muscle mass, that is potentially setting you up for a big problem further down the line. You won't feel it in your 30s or your 40s. But if you get into your 60s and 70s and you've got really low muscle mass, you're at big risk of a horrible condition called sarcopenia, which is basically where you've got such low muscle mass, you can't get out of a chair, you can't climb the stairs. So there's a risk that if a lot of skinny people use it to become super skinny, like the other day I was talking to one of the Real Housewives of New Jersey on Piers Morgan's show, and she said, we're all on it, right? That none of them were by any measure overweight or obese. Indeed, they were skinny, right? The risk is we're setting ourselves up with a time bomb further down the line of people who will have real problems with their mobility as they age. So yeah, as you see, at every turn with these drugs, what I hope my book is a guide to is so people can think through the benefits and risks for themselves, because there's huge benefits and risks at every turn here.
I know you have a flight to catch, so there are two final questions I want to end on. We've spoken about lots of the negatives and the downsides. With everything you've researched for this book, what gives us the most reason for hope?
It's mind-blowing. The biggest cause of death in our societies, we've got a treatment for it. And study after study is now finding that brings with it staggering medical benefits. This is the most important medical breakthrough, quite possibly of our lifetimes, right? I think almost certainly, you're much younger than me, almost certainly of your lifetime, right? It's mind-blowing. So I think really the reasons for hope are huge. And what we're seeing with study after study now is huge reduction in a whole array of risks. And that seems to be, there may be some independent mechanisms that are happening, but it seems to be obesity is so bad for you that if you reverse obesity, you reverse these risks. That's what we knew from bariatric surgery already. But now you're given a much easier and more accessible, and bariatric surgery is a fucking horrible operation, right? You give people a much easier way of doing it. And soon it'll be much cheaper, right? 8 years from now, Ozempic goes out of patent, which means pretty much any medical company can manufacture it. At that point, it'll be a daily pill. It'll be $1 a day, probably about £1.20, something like that. No, less than a pound. Sorry, I'm always bad at currency conversions. I have a real mental block on. But it'll be very, very cheap. At that point, assuming the 12 big risks that I write about in the book don't become even bigger than we think, and there's some of the risks to potentially to pregnant women or to some concerns around thyroid cancer, if they don't turn out to be bigger than we think, and they might, I think half of British people will be taking it 10 years from now as a daily pill.
I want to end our conversation where you started your journey. So imagine somebody listening to this right now is you. It's Johann on the day when you were about to take that very first dose of Ozempic and you needed to know everything, but in a really succinct way, right? If Johann was listening and he needed to know the good, the bad, the benefits, the risks, but in a way where he can kind of digest it very quickly and make a judgment, what would you need to hear?
I think the thing I was least prepared for were the psychological effects of these drugs, and I would really want to flag this up to people. So for the first 6 months I was taking the drugs, it was a really weird thing. I was getting what I wanted. I was losing loads of weight. My back pain went away. I could feel I was healthier. My neighbour's hot gardener hit on me 2 months in. Loads of good stuff was happening. But I actually didn't feel better emotionally. Actually, if anything, I felt a little bit worse. I was thinking, this is weird. What's going on here? And some doctors, I want to stress this is contested, but some doctors are concerned that these drugs may be causing a significant increase for a minority of people in depression or even suicide risk, right? Suicidal ideation. I was thinking, why would that be? And I had a real epiphany about it in a branch of KFC in Las Vegas. I was researching for a different book I'm doing, the murder of someone that I knew and loved, and it was hard. And I went on autopilot to this branch of KFC I've been to 1,000 times, and I went in and I ordered what I would have ordered before I was taking Ozempic to kind of numb my emotions. I ordered a bucket of fried chicken, and I had one chicken drumstick, and I looked at the bucket and I thought, oh fuck, I can't eat this, right? You can't overeat when you're on Ozempic, you would throw up. And I remember very clearly a voice in my head saying, you're just going to have to feel bad. And really realizing, so in the book I go through the 5 reasons why we eat. One of them is obviously to sustain our bodies. The other 4 are all psychological. And one of them for me is, I grew up in a family where there was a lot of addiction and craziness. And I realized from when I was a very young age, I ate to calm myself down, right? To sort of numb myself. And you can't do that on these drugs. What these drugs do is they radically interrupt your eating patterns. It's obviously a good thing. It's why you lose so much weight. But what that can also does for a lot of people is it brings to the surface the deep underlying emotional reasons why they ate all along, ones they may well not have been aware of. Now, again, that can be a good thing. There are better ways for me to deal with feeling sad than Colonel Sanders, right? God bless him, but there are better ways. But that can be a difficult transition. And I was not prepared for that. And that's one of the things, I go through so many things in the book I really want people to be aware of if they think you're taking these drugs. And that's one of the things I would really want, if I could go back in time, it would have helped me to be aware of that. I would have had a less rocky 6 months. So I would really want to flag that up to people.
Amazing. Johann, I've really enjoyed this. Thank you. I'm going to make sure that your new book, Magic Pill, is linked in the show notes below. If people want to go elsewhere to learn about you, to get the book, to learn more about your work, where can they go?
Oh, you've asked really great questions, Sean. They can go to johannhari.com. It's where you can see where to follow me on social media. You can see where to get my books and audiobooks. I meant to say you can get Magic Pill from all good bookshops. That's the script they give me. But the truth is you can get it from shit bookshops as well. We don't have a test. There's no we're not like your bookshop is not good enough to stock my book. But yeah, hooray. And the website for the book, this book specifically, is magicpillbook.com, where you can find out what Stephen Fry and Davina McCall and Gabor Mate and loads of other people said about the book. Hooray.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Oh, what a pleasure. Cheers, Sean. I really enjoyed that. Thanks so much.